Welcome back to Northwest City Politics and Know with Juanita. We're glad that you're joining us again this week. We're happy to have you watching our show. And we're very glad that there are people like you out there that are interested in the issues that are happening in the 9 cities in Northwest Community Television's viewing area. It's important for good government in your city that you're active and involved, and that you relate back and forth with the city council and the staff of your city, that there's a good flow of information going back and forth. If you haven't watched our show before, each week we'll have on someone from one of the 9 cities talking about the current and future issues so you'll know what's happening in our cities. And then from time to time, we'll have people in from groups that affect all of our cities in different ways, which we're going to be doing tonight. Tonight, we're going to be learning about a couple of lake associations that formed in the city of New Hope. And we'll be having people on, and we'll ask you to take your pen and pencil out and put down their names, their emails, their phone numbers. In case you have any questions, you can be in contact with them, particularly if you live in their watershed districts. Now, I'm very happy tonight to welcome Jodie Taitt, Bob White, and Dan Stauner. Jodie is with, now I gotta make sure I say it right, the Meadow Lake Watershed Association,
correct.
Right? Okay, because then Bob is with the Friends of Northwood Lake Association.
Yes, that's correct.
And Dan Stauner has a big background, right? You've been on the city council, you've been on the Bassett Creek Watershed and the Shingle Creek Watershed, and you're also part of the Meadow Lake Association. So we're very happy to have all of you here with us tonight, because water is an important issue, and people can learn a little bit about what's happening in the city of New Hope, but there's lots of other associations, lots of other lakes around in our surrounding area. And so I thought maybe we could start with Jodie. Tell a little bit about your background with the lake and how long you've lived there.
Sure. I've lived on Meadow Lake for about 24 years. For over half of them, I did like most of my neighbors did, was to mow my lawn all the way down to the water's edge. And about 10 years ago, we had an event on Meadow Lake that drew all of our attention to it. We had an LJ bloom.
Oh.
And it wasn't pleasant. It was smelly and did not look nice.
Oh, right in your backyard.
Right in our backyard. And so it drew us together as a community. It brought us together to take action, to educate ourselves, and form our lake association.
Right. Bob, why don't you introduce yourself out to our wider audience?
I'm Bob White. I live on Northwood Lake, about 30 years now, and we enjoy living on the lake. It's a nice neighborhood, but as like Jodie said, our lake has some issues and water quality issues over the years, and they've been getting worse and worse, and so we decided to take action and form an association too, to see what we can do.
Okay, and Dan Stauner.
I've lived on Meadow Lake since New Year's Eve of 1988. That's when I moved in. So that's what, I'm in my 26th year there now.
Right.
And,
so all three of you have seen a lot of changes.
Yes.
And my wife, Diane, had a lake monitor since the early 90s. She initially started doing just basically Secchi disc readings for the Freshwater Foundation, and then shifted to what's called the Citizens Assisted Monitoring Program, the CAMP, through the Met Council, and has been doing that since like 1993, 94, whatever it was, way back when. So that's how we got involved in the lake. And then with the algae bloom in 2005, we got together with our neighbors, and that got me into the watershed commissions, which both Diane and I served on the Shingle Creek Commission, and then got me into city politics and on the city council for 2 terms.
One thing leads to another right?
Yes, it does.
And then I asked people if, I think I'll start with Dan, on how the lakes were formed originally, and then for both of you to describe what the lake was like when you first moved in. So we'll start with Dan here.
Meadow Lake is actually a natural lake. If you look at the old maps, the pre-settlement maps when Minnesota was first being surveyed by the government, shows up on those maps. So it used to flow to the east.
Oh.
The outlet used to flow through what is now the golf course and on to a creek that went down ultimately to Twin Lakes. When the area was developed, the direction of flow was shifted, and there was an artificial outlet put in on the west end, which now flows through storm sewers to Bass Creek. So it's changed.
Right.
Northwood, on the other hand, is an artificial lake.
Ah.
It is a man-made lake that was created by damming the north branch of Bassett Creek. And I'm not sure when that was done. Bob might know more about that
Right.
than I was.
Early
but-
70s.
Okay, early 70s.
Quite a while ago.
And apparently there was a fair amount of dredging. There must have been some wetlands in the area, because I've been told by people in the area that a lot of the houses are in like the Jordan Avenue area around there were built on fill that was taken out of.
Well, they actually filled our backyards with it. So they dredged it out. It was a wetlands. They dredged it out, and you filled our backyards.
So both the two lakes have very different histories
Oh,
and very
right,
different
right.
characteristics
Right.
because of it.
So good to look a little backwards on where it started. And then, Bob, why don't you describe what your lake was like when you first moved in, or maybe why you bought it, right?
Well, we bought it because it was a nice lake, and
Yeah.
there was no aquatic plants on it. It was 6 to 7 feet deep. Yeah, it was great for canoeing and paddle boating. You couldn't see down more than a foot into the water because
okay.
it was so much sediment.
Oh, right.
There was a lot of fish in the lake, a lot of rough fish, carp. They're bottom feeders, and so they create a lot of sediment.
Right.
And that's why we couldn't see down to the bottom.
Sure. And what was Meadow Lake like?
Meadow Lake is beautiful. It's just such a lovely place to live, and there's a lot of wildlife, muskrat and snapping turtles, and a lot of migrating birds that come through in the spring and leave in the fall. And it's just a delightful place. Some days are good and some days are bad, and the bad days are more often now with the water quality issues. In midsummer, mid to late summer, the water would get murky and a little bit of cloudiness to it, but now it seems to be more prevalent.
Right.
The amount of the springtime and summer that's devoted to algae growth or other plants that are undesirable.
Now, in our lake has a 1,360 acre watershed, which is a huge watershed.
Oh, yeah, mention all the parts that were involved. I think one of you was mentioning, maybe you can mention how far does it spread out?
Well, our watershed, 40% of it is in the city of New Hope, and 60% of it comes in the city of Plymouth. And it runs from, probably almost like Zachary Lane, north to 48th, and then south, probably like Medicine Lake Road, not quite that far south. So it's a very large watershed for the size of our lake, which is 15 acres. That's a very large watershed, and it's hard on the lake to have that much drainage coming into it. So there's a lot of phosphorus, a lot of sediment coming in.
And there's a lot of people that don't even realize that they're contributing to it, I bet.
That's right. They don't know. They don't realize it.
Right.
They don't know where that water ends up.
Right. And why don't you describe for Meadow Lake?
Meadow Lake's watershed is comprised of 103 acres and 300 homes. And of those homes, about 47 of them are on the shoreline itself. As well as we have a city park and a golf course on the shoreline too. Our watershed is also comprised of 20 streets. So all of those curbs along those 20 streets are contributing to the runoff that will eventually find its way to Meadow Lake.
Well, so was the algae that prompted your association something that then came from a long period of buildup?
Well, living along the lake all those years, I was sleepy to the lake, to be honest. It was just there, and it was lovely, and we all enjoyed it. And then one day, the lake spoke to us in a way that surprised us. We had an algae bloom, and all of a sudden it just started, and it was just something that we called it the green blob. And so it was very disconcerting. And personally, I started making some phone calls. I didn't understand what was happening. I called the city. A few city staff persons came by, and we all stood there and scratched our heads and
what's
trying to figure out what was happening.
Yeah.
The LJ just took over the surface of the water. It was quite deep, I believe almost a foot deep. If I
my
remember
goodness,
correctly.
that's a lot of algae.
It was, and it was impacting the waterfall. I mean, the ducklings that spring couldn't negotiate the thickness of that growth, and so we had a concern, and we started gathering as a neighborhood. We started meeting in people's garages, trying to figure out what do we do next, and who do we need to reach out to, and what do we need to learn.
Right. Now, Northwood, it was like gradually moving along, and then you said that the city gathered people together. I'll let the two of you talk to that just a little bit.
I had experience with our own lake association. And at the time, I was on the council, and I was also on the Bassett Creek Commission. So I was aware of the issues regarding Northwood. And I knew that our association had helped bring the city's attention to the problems of Meadow Lake, and that it would be useful to have citizen input and a vehicle for citizen input. So I and Kirk McDonald put together this plan to have a town hall meeting at City Hall, and my wife joined me because at the time she was the Shingle Creek Watershed Commissioner, and we were able to invite residents from the area, and we got a phenomenal turnout. On a night when the Twins were in a playoff game, we got like 40 people there, which was just incredible. And tremendous amount of interest, and basically we just let them take the ball and run with it, and they did, and they formed an association.
Yep.
So it was like a growing concern over your lake, right? Over time.
Over time, what happened is there was a lot of fish in the lake, and the lake gradually got shallower. The fish started dying off, and once the fish died off, we could see the bottom of the lake.
Right.
It was great. But then the sun could get to the bottom of the lake too, and all these plants started growing, and pretty soon it was really bad.
Well, now we'll move into the issue of the fact that water quality and quantity is a growing concern across the country, across the world, I guess, right? I think we were talking earlier about California and the desperate straits that they're in. And so I thought we'll start off where maybe you can talk about what is the root cause of the problem in your two lakes. We won't talk about the whole issue of water. We'll narrow it down.
One word?
Okay.
Phosphorus.
Okay. Very good, very good.
That is it. The levels of phosphorus in our lake are extremely high. They're 3 to 4 to 5 times what the Minnesota allows as a maximum. So the maximum is 50 parts per million, and we've been up to 150, up to 400 parts per million.
So phosphorus is the chemical, I know that much. What else can you tell us about it in the lake?
Phosphorus is the nutrient that the algae feeds off of, essentially. It's the nutrient that causes water to cloud, because it provides food, essentially, for microscopic algae, which then essentially turns the water into a green soup.
Right.
And just as in Northwood, Meadow Lake has very high phosphorus levels, something in the neighborhood on average of 260 parts per million. So it's high, and it's been high for a very long time. I have the advantage of seeing the monitoring data that Diane's collected over the years, and it's consistently
going up.
Going up, yes.
Phosphorus is in everything.
Okay.
It's in the leaves, the grass clippings, the sediment.
Right.
So it's in car, gasoline and oil.
Right.
So pretty much phosphorus is in everything.
Road salt too, oddly
Yes.
enough.
So it's all feeding its way into the water, right?
Yep.
Exactly. And it enters the water, and it enters our lake untreated. So what we tell our folks that every curb is a shoreline.
Right.
Your curb that goes around, in the front of your street on your property line, whatever ends up in that curb will find its way down to your storm drain into the water. So our lifestyle and just how the decisions we make can really impact water quality.
Oh, right. And it's mainly an issue of when it rains, right? I mean, all that phosphorus is laying there, but it's the rain and the storms?
Rain will cause it.
Okay.
It's the leaves that
Okay.
blow in. People could rake their leaves into the lake. They could rake them into the stream. So it's not just the rain, but the
Okay.
rain
Lawn
causes it
sprinkling.
too.
Yeah.
Lawn sprinkling.
Okay.
Fertilizers that you
Yep.
put,
Oh, right,
the old,
right.
we used to have phosphorus in our fertilizers, and that was a huge cause of excess phosphorus in our lakes.
New Hope actually was one of the first cities to pass an ordinance banning phosphorus in furnaces back in the 90s.
Yeah, I remember that. And then it's a concern, though, because there's so many areas the rain hits and runs off, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Because there were somebody can go over all the ones.
Well, it's your roof.
Okay.
It's your driveway. And it's even snow melt in addition to rainfall as well. So any impervious surface that we create in our neighborhoods is a source of runoff.
Oh, your driveways, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Your
sidewalks,
front
all
lawn,
of them, right.
Most mown turf grass lawns shed 95% of the water that falls on them.
And then another issue that is a quality of life issue sometimes is the number of geese that are in the
Yes.
parks and in the
Yep.
neighborhoods. Maybe somebody can speak
Well,
to that a little bit.
we had a huge problem with the geese. There was geese everywhere. They were in the water, in the parks. They were leaving their marks in the parks, on the trails. And so we did go to the city and complained. My neighbor, at one time, she counted 260 geese that she could see from her backyard.
Oh my goodness, that's
a lot of geese.
Yeah.
So the city looked into it, and they came up with a solution of addling the eggs, or oiling the eggs. I call it a form of birth control, because having that many geese on our small
Right.
lake is not normal. That's,
Right.
And part of what attracted them was all our aquatic plants that they liked.
Oh, right.
And it was
right.
a safe place for them, and so they just kept multiplying. The first year that they oiled the eggs, they oiled 120 eggs.
Okay.
And then the second year, it was reduced down to 38. And now this year, last summer, I should say, we probably had 30 geese on the lake, which is a huge,
a manageable
Yes.
amount, then I
Yep.
imagine. Is the same thing true on Meadow Lake?
It was at one time. Meadow Lake, when I moved in,
Okay.
had a substantial goose population. But a lot of that actually got addressed as the city and the association promoted buffer strips. Geese don't like going through tall vegetation because the predators can hide in that. We've had a fox hanging around the lake this winter that we've seen with some regularity.
Right.
And foxes will take a geese if they
sure.
can get them
Sure.
by ambush. So geese do not like going through tall vegetation to get onto the shore. They love mown grass. They like to sit on mown grass and graze. So one way of reducing the numbers of geese is making it a less friendly habitat for them
Right.
by having shoreline
Right.
buffers with taller plants that they don't like going through. So we've seen a significant number in the reduction of geese. One interesting thing, this is probably, about 4 years ago,
Okay.
5 years ago, the city maintenance crew came in and cut down all the vegetation, mowed back all the vegetation along the buffer strips
Okay.
around Meadow Lake Park. The place was overrun with geese. It hadn't been
Like
before that.
right away.
Right away. Open ground, no predators. They want to be there. So one very good way of dealing with geese and reducing their numbers is buffer strips.
Buffer strips are supposed to work,
Right.
except when you get too many of them, they just make trails right through it,
yeah, when you-
and that's the problem that we had
When
on our
the
lake.
population is that big. All right, now I'm going to direct some of this to Dan, but I'll ask both of you to interact, because the City of New Hope has done a number of actions over the years, so I thought we should let people know the kinds of things that the city has been involved, because the neighbors that live there are most strongly involved, but you've brought your message to the city. So now, I'm not sure if I'm going to have all the right numbers here, but I'm going to have Dan talk about Meadow Lake, because you did things with inlets and grit chambers, and I'll let you give the numbers and what
actually,
happens.
one of the first things that came as a result of the neighborhood getting together and pressuring the city was the changes to the street project that was scheduled for 2006.
Okay.
We were scheduled to have our streets reconstructed in 2006.
Okay.
Well, as part of the attempt to address the problem in the lake, the city added the addition of changes in the stormwater management in the area. What they did was install 4 grit chambers as part of the project. Grit chambers are big concrete things that essentially cause water to swirl around and by centrifugal force drop out sediments, and it helps remove phosphorus and dirt and all the other things that would otherwise wind up in the lake. So the city installed 4 of those, one on the north side, one on the, well, 2 on the north side, 1 on the west side, and 1 really big one right by the entrance to Meadow Lake Park that takes in all the water from the south side of the lake. And then, again, we've promoted buffer strips over it. The city also came in and dredged out the stormwater deltas, because there were some substantial stormwater deltas that hadn't built up. One resident had actually complained that when you got a heavy rain, you had a rooster tail from the water flowing in so fast and hitting that stormwater delta, and you could see the stormwater deltas rising up. So those were dredged out over the winter, and in the process of doing that, the city did a drawdown of the lake to create a path around the edge of the lake where they could get heavy equipment out to do the dredging. It wasn't a complete drawdown. The lake was not completely dewatered, but it was drawn down a couple feet to allow a mud flat, essentially, that would freeze and support the equipment. One of the positive side effects of that was that it knocked back some of the curly leaf pondweed. And interestingly enough, drawdowns are now considered a way to deal with curly leaf pondweed in particular in an appropriate setting. So that was one of the things the city did there.
Okay, and that's considered an invasive species, right?
Curly leaf pondweed is an invasive species. It's also a species that, because it dies back early in the year, and all the phosphorus it's used gets released back into the water, it creates late season algae blooms. So it's one of those problems that you want to address.
And then I think you talked about that there was a buildup of a delta that some of the neighbors helped take care of with the city's help, right?
Yes,
down on Northwood.
Yes, we had a project we called Dig the Delta. We have several inlets on our lake, and there happen to be 2 pretty much right across from each other. And over the years, the city has put sand on in the wintertime on the roads, and that sand has built up. And so it's formed a delta that was just, and the water was only just a few inches deep over it, and you couldn't canoe through it or paddle boat. So we, as residents, worked with the city, and we formed a brigade of, we had people out digging and filling buckets full of sand and hauling them up, and then we hauled the sand up to the street and put it in just a dumpster that the city had provided, and we probably had 3-4 tons of sand that we removed. So
big job.
Yes, but it helped. We had another delta too, where the inlet from the city of Plymouth, and that was a huge delta that affected the flow of the water, and the city did remove that delta. They removed I always tell everybody, they removed 180 pickup loads of sediment.
Just from that one north end,
Just from that one end. And now again, there's another, that was 60 years ago when they did that, and now there's another delta that's formed again.
Just if I could comment on it, interestingly enough, the city for years has been contributing to what's called the Bassett Creek Channel Maintenance Fund. And that was an opportunity where the city could go to Bassett Creek and say, hey, we want some of that money to help fund to clean out this delta that's blocking the channel, essentially. So it was funded in part through
the Watershed
through
Commission.
the Watershed Commission. The TMDL is
Okay.
an acronym for Total Maximum Daily
Okay.
Load. It's a measure. You're supposed to basically, the standards that are set are the maximum you're supposed to have
Okay.
of phosphorus and other nutrients
for your lake to be good.
for your lake to be good. And the TMDL process is supposed to be a study to is part of a planning
Okay.
process to look at the condition of the lake and what can be done to address it. Now, I've had experience with the TMDL process on Shingle Creek and the TMDL process on Bassett
Right.
Creek. They're night and day. Bassett Creek actually did do studies
Okay.
where they sent in people. I don't think they've done the Northwood
No,
one
they
yet.
haven't.
But they actually did some serious studies where
Okay.
they hired an engineering firm to go in and do water monitoring, do dissolved oxygen tests, look at the thermocline, all kinds of different things
Right.
to determine the state of the lake and what could be done with it. Shingle did not do that.
We currently are working with the City of Plymouth. City of Plymouth has been very responsive to our needs and just talking to them.
Okay, I'm going to stop you just a minute because this is the transition into what are your groups actually doing.
Okay.
So I'll
Okay.
do that in terms of laying the show out.
Okay.
Is because there are actual things that your groups have worked on other than what the city and what the watershed has done. Okay, now go ahead and tell us about what's happening with Plymouth.
Well, we've been talking with the City of Plymouth for probably 3 years now. And we've been working with Derek Ashey, who's our water resource person.
Okay.
And we went to him, and so we want to have a meeting and discuss the problems on the lake and all
Right.
the sediment. And we also had a big problem of every time it rained heavy and the lake flooded, when the water went down, we had all this garbage on our shoreline. We
Right.
didn't know where it was
Yeah.
coming for years. And then we, myself and a couple others from our lake association, walked over in Plymouth along where the creek comes.
Right.
And here we found this wetlands that was next to an apartment.
Oh.
Their dumpsters was right next to the wetlands.
Right.
The covers were open and all this garbage was blowing into the wetlands, and
Right.
that's where it was coming from. So we went to Plymouth, the city
Right,
of Plymouth,
right.
and we said, this is a problem, and they addressed it, and they made them make sure that their dumpsters are closed, and they cleaned up the mess.
Mm-hmm.
So working with the city of Plymouth too has been wonderful.
Well, I want to thank all of you so much
you're
for
welcome.
sharing lots of information with me. So
Thank
I
you.
learned a lot in the process. And then for sharing the information with our audience out there. So I hope it will stimulate some of you to be thinking of your own community and maybe what might need to be done in your community. Be sure to tune in next week for part 2 of the watershed lake issues. We're glad that you're with us, and we hope you join us next week. Bye.